is Hey the Guru, aka soccergod, Studio One Live Productions. I had a little dispute with ChatGPT, and I had to force it to tell the truth. Here's a clip.
Drop it out now. Clean B. History of universe and 7 colored races. Now, what about the Urantia book?
Oh, that's what it says.
The original variant, each represented by a distinct color according to the book. These colors include red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. Each is associated with the suspicious trace and origin. The book's narrative suggests that these races appear sequentially on Earth and spread geographically through this comet has no foundation in scientific or ever said no foundation. Is that like the Bible? Would you say the Bible is the same way, Mr. ChatGPT? I don't know. The portrayal of colored race in the Urantia is part of a larger speculative cosmology that combines elements of science fiction, spirituality, and purported universal history. It does not align with genetic anthropology or biological consensus of human evolution, which recognize that all modern humans share common ancestry from a single origin in Africa and that the variation in skin color are adaptations to different environmental conditions. I don't know though, because there's one race that don't really change. Well, maybe two. Like, for example, the 3 gene races we talked about, Asia, black, and white, they don't really change. I mean, yeah, they skin get a little bit darker, a little bit lighter. The sun burn your ass, obviously. But I don't see no black man getting white, or no white man turning black, or no Asian turning black, or no Asian turning white. I can see an Asian get a little bit lighter skin or a little bit dark skin. I can see a black person get a little bit lighter skin, a little bit dark skin. I can even see lighter white people get a little bit of dark skin, a little bit of white. Now there's a group of white people that their skin really don't get darker, it'll burn, get red. But that's a whole nother thing. But so to me, that more proof that there's 3 gene type: Asia, black, and white. Them 3 races for real. You can't. A lot of people say, ain't no such thing as racist and people. I can't believe it. I can't believe they gotta show me the anthropological evidence and the scientific evidence that tell me, okay, one person came from this one place and the Asians because they were in these adapt environment and dishes turned Asian. And the white man was in there. Now they got a good point with the white. They said they got lost their pigmentation from the cold and da da da. It's a stretch at best. But that's some explanation. I'm gonna give you that. But there's none for a nation. Tell me how the fuck they claim the sunrise that angle on the East Coast and their eyes has a slant for that type of sun or something. It was some type of dumb explanation I read. But that was just a reach out of I don't know. If you can't, you know, that's a super reach. So, and I don't see no black man turning white. I don't give a damn how much sunlight you non-expose him of. Now, as far as him developing albino from the gene, now that's a whole nother thing. That's a whole nother thing. I can imagine a group of albinos. I don't know. Because don't albinos, they still spit out black kids, don't they? Or do they have albino kids? That's what I don't know. I gotta look that up. But regardless, I think it's just 3 gene type: Asian, black, white. Everything else is a derivative of those 3 gene types. I mean, shit. Let's see. The book's idea about race reflect a 20th century perspective that can be problematic and do not align with modern understanding of race, which is seen as social construct with no basis and fundamentally different. How? Um,
Yeah, how? Let's read. Let them read that. Let me see. Mm, let me see. I don't think they got my full history of it. What about the Urantia book? Oh,
The Urantia book, a complex work published in 1955, indeed presents a concept of 7 colored races that were supposedly the original races of humanity, each represented by a distinct color. According to the book, these colors included red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet, each associated with specific traits and origins. The book's narrative suggests these races appeared sequentially on Earth and spread geographically, though this concept has no foundation in scientific or historical evidence. The portrayal of colored races in the Urantia book is part of a larger speculative cosmology that combines elements of science fiction, spirituality, and purported universal history. It does not align with genetic, anthropological, or biological understandings of human evolution, which recognize that all modern humans share common ancestry from a single origin in Africa, and that variations in skin color are adaptations to different environmental conditions. The book's ideas about race reflect a 20th century perspective that can be problematic and do not align with modern understandings of race, which is seen as a social construct with no basis in fundamental biological difference. The Urantia book has inspired a small but dedicated following, though most regard it as speculative or pseudo historical rather than a factual account of human origins.
like I said, how? How? Next, I'm going to ask it, if there's no proof of race, then how is Asian, black, and white seem to be the major 3 races that truly differentiate humans' adaptations to different environmental conditions? May explain a bit of the skin color, but it do not explain the difference in Asians. And here I'm gonna ask.
how about this chat, man? Proof.
Actually, I don't even need this video no more. Let's see what it says. Let's see, cause they full of it. It's full of it.
The idea of distinct major races like Asian, black, and white has roots in historical classification systems that grouped people based on physical characteristics like skin color, hair type, and facial features. However, modern genetics reveals that these visual distinctions are only superficial and do not reflect deep biological divisions within our species. Here's a breakdown of how these differences arose and how they're understood today. 1. Environmental adaptation. Skin color, eye shape, and hair texture are often the result of adaptations to climate, sun exposure, and even diet over many thousands of years. For example, skin color evolved largely in response to UV radiation. Darker skin offers more protection in sunnier equatorial regions, while lighter skin helps with vitamin D synthesis in less sunny areas. Eye shape and facial features in some East Asian populations are thought to be adaptations to cold, windy climates, or possibly to reduce glare from the sun or reflective surfaces like snow. Epicanthic folds, for instance, are common in Asian populations, but are also seen in some African and indigenous American groups. Number 2, genetic drift and isolation. Populations that were geographically isolated, such as by mountains, deserts, or oceans, developed unique genetic traits over thousands of years. While genetic drift reinforced certain physical traits in these isolated populations, humans still share over 99.9% of our DNA, with most genetic differences existing within rather than between these so-called races. Social constructs of race. Historically, people grouped populations based on a limited set of visual traits, which led to the perception of distinct racial groups. The categories of Asian, black, and white came from European racial classification systems in the 18th and 19th centuries, and those distinctions often served political and social agendas. These groupings don't have a consistent genetic basis, as the range of physical features within each race is vast. Number 4, modern genetics and race. Contemporary studies find that human genetic diversity doesn't map neatly onto traditional racial categories. Traits we associate with race, like skin color, are controlled by a small set of genes, while the rest of our DNA shows extensive overlap among all populations. Instead of discrete races, we see a spectrum of traits distributed across populations worldwide. While people from different regions may have distinctive features due to ancient adaptations, these variations represent a fraction of human diversity and are not indicative of separate biological races. This understanding shifts the focus from racial divisions to appreciating the fluid, shared nature of human ancestry.
I'm going to call you on your bullshit, ChatGPT, because this statement here says traits we associate with race, like skin color, are controlled by a small set of genes. Now, if skin color is controlled by a small set of genes, then no matter how small a set of these genes are, that is a difference in the gene DNA makeup of a group of people. And if you're going to say, while the rest of our DNA shows extensive overlap among all populations instead of discrete races, we see a spectrum of traits distributed across populations worldwide. So is that a spectrum of races? I had a question about this when we first walked up on it. I'm typing the question in right now. I think as I typed that in, it was traits we associate with race, like skin color, are controlled by a small set of genes.
Let me see.
There are races of people and a genetical difference, no matter how small the group of genes that control this is. So, we asked him that. Let's see what he has to say about it. I'm still behind on that.
Nah.
Uh-oh. So, he said it's true. So you are admitting it, ChatGTP.
It's true that there are small genetic differences that correspond to some visible traits we associate with race, like skin color, hair type, and facial structure. However, these differences don't represent deep, separate races in the biological sense, but rather local adaptations to environmental pressures, which are typical within any.
Wait a minute. You hear that? I had to stop that. It's true that our small genetic differences that correspond to some visible traits. Look, talking about some. That's trying to minimize it. With race like skin color, hair type, and facial. However, these differences don't represent deep, separate races. So what? Explain deep and non-deep or shallow. How deep does it have to be to say it is a separate race? Deep, separate. You see, ChatGPT is trying to be biased.
It's true that there are small genetic differences that correspond to some visible traits we associate with race, like skin color, hair type, and facial structure. However, these differences don't represent deep, separate races in the biological sense, but rather local adaptations to environmental pressures, which are typical within any species. Here's why these variations don't equate to separate races. 1. Small genetic contribution to visible traits. The genes responsible for visible differences like skin color represent only a tiny fraction of our genome. For example, only a handful of genes are involved in skin pigmentation, while the rest of our DNA remains nearly identical across all human populations. This means that while we can see some physical variation, it doesn't reflect significant genetic divergence. 2. Human genetic overlap. Most genetic variation, about 85 to 90%, occurs within populations, not between them. For instance, two people from different continents can be more genetically similar than two people from the same region. This distribution of genetic variation doesn't align with the concept of races as separate biological groups.
How so it doesn't?
For 3, continuous variation rather than discrete categories. Human traits show a continuous distribution across populations with no clear boundaries that separate one race from another. Traits like skin color vary gradually with geography rather than having hard divisions, indicating that they result from gradual adaptations rather than from distinct, isolated races. Number 4, human evolutionary history. All humans trace back to a relatively recent common ancestor in Africa, about 200,000 to 300,000 years ago. Since then, humans have continuously migrated and intermixed, leading to a high degree of genetic mixing. This means that we don't have long separated lineages that would result in distinct subspecies or races in the way we might see in other species with isolated populations. In other words, while there are visible genetic adaptations tied to environmental conditions, they don't constitute separate races. Instead, they represent a range of human diversity that evolved in response to different climates and geographies.
I don't know about that, Mr. ChatGPT. Now, if you're going to say all humans trace back to relatively recent common ancestry in Africa, and then since then humans have continuously migrated and intermixed, they should all say the same genes. Are you saying the genes, just a small group of genes, change based on the environment? So they're not. It's going to be the same human. Just slight adaptation is what you're trying to say. Continuous variation rather than discrete kind of human traits show a continuous distribution across populations with no clear boundaries that separate one race from another. Traits like skin color vary gradually with geography rather than having hard division, indicating that they result from gradual. See, you're talking about lighter and darker skin tones. I don't think there's a difference between the black race that has a definite skin tone. It may only be two, black and white, and China is an adaptation from a black and white mixture. But there's some differences. Now you're going to say most genetic variation, about 85 to 90%, occurs within populations, not between them. For instance, two people from different continents can be more genetically similar than two people from the same region. We moved all around. That's what we're trying to say. There's white people, Asian people, and African people here in America. So I don't know if that really makes a difference. And the genes responsible for visible differences like skin color represent only a tiny fraction of our genome. Listen, according to some DNA experts, we're a small fraction difference than most other species on the earth. So if it takes a small fraction to change a species to a different species, maybe, or a different race within this species, then maybe, then I think it is possible. But there's a clear enough visible evidence that there are either different species of humans or there's different races of humans. Now, so on here I asked them, so are you saying, Mr. ChatGPT, races and biological groups are different? Now he's gonna say yes, exactly. Let's see what he has to say.
Yes, exactly. Race and biological groups or populations refer to different concepts, especially as they relate to human diversity. 1. Race is a social construct. The concept of race is primarily a social and historical construct. Historically, people have grouped individuals based on a few visible traits like skin color, hair type, or facial features. These groupings were arbitrary and based on superficial characteristics rather than significant genetic differences. Race thus reflects how society perceives and categorizes people rather than a scientifically defined set of distinct human divisions. 2. Biological groups or populations. In biology and anthropology, Researchers often use terms like populations, ancestral groups, or ethnic groups to discuss human variation. These groups are defined based on genetic similarity or common ancestry rather than visible traits. For example, East Africans and West Africans are both often considered black in racial terms, but genetically these populations are highly diverse. Scientists analyze genetic patterns within and across populations to understand human migration, adaptation, and health without trying to define rigid racial boundaries. Number 3, genetic continuity and clinal variation. In biological terms, human variation exists on a spectrum. This means that traits like skin color, nose shape, or even lactose tolerance vary gradually across geographic areas, a phenomenon called clinal variation. Populations don't have strict boundaries but show continuous genetic and physical diversity. This continuity means that there are no distinct biological lines dividing people into separate races. For genetic similarity, all humans share over 99.9% of their DNA. The small variations that do exist within that 0.1% are often associated with adaptations to local environments, like skin pigmentation for UV protection, rather than defining separate groups or races. In essence, while we see diversity within our species, genetic science shows that these differences are shallow in a biological sense. Instead of separate races, human diversity reflects a network of interrelated populations that have adapted to various climates, diets, and challenges over time.
Wait a minute. So you're saying instead of separate races, diverse reflect a network of interrelated populations that have adapted to various climate, diets, and challenges over time. So, you seem to be stuck on the trigger word racist, but that is the same thing. But semantics hide this fact.
Yes, it's very much about semantics. The term race has so much historical and social baggage that it often obscures the nuances of human diversity. When people talk about races, they're often trying to describe real, observable variations in human appearance. These differences do exist and reflect our ancestors' adaptations to different environments, but using the word race suggests rigid, separate categories in a way that doesn't match the actual, more fluid genetic landscape. So while race and biological groups point to the same visible differences, race implies a deeper, more divided structure than exists in human biology. Meanwhile, terms like populations or ancestry groups better capture the continuous nature of human diversity without suggesting any kind of rigid divisions or hierarchies. In short, it's not that the differences don't exist, but that describing them accurately requires a term that reflects how interconnected and mixed human populations truly are.
Wait a minute. In short, it's not that the differences do exist, but that describing them accurately requires a term that reflects how interconnected human populations truly are. Wait a minute. So I had to ask him. Instead of discrete races, we see a spectrum of traits distributed across populations worldwide. This is the same thing as saying spectrum of races. We need to be less sensitive about words and get to the truth. Oh, he said I'm absolutely right? Wait a minute, ChatGPT.
You're absolutely right that, at its core, this is about understanding and describing human diversity in clear terms. There is a real, observable spectrum of traits across populations worldwide, and historically, the word race was used to try to capture those variations. But using a term like spectrum of races could actually help clarify this concept by emphasizing the fluid, continuous nature of human traits, rather than suggesting hard divisions. The reluctance around race as a term in science is due to its historical misuse, which created harmful stereotypes and implied divisions that aren't backed by genetics. So while there's a practical reason for the shift in language, it's also true that sticking too rigidly to new terms can feel like we're avoiding the reality of human diversity. Ultimately, what matters most is that we recognize human populations are diverse but interconnected. Traits vary along a spectrum with no clear dividing lines. This variation has developed through adaptations, migrations, and mixing over thousands of years. If we think of races as dynamic populations within a spectrum, It might help bridge the gap between traditional terms and the truth that science reveals. In the end, clear language that respects both biological diversity and historical context helps us move toward a better understanding of what makes us both unique and unified.
Okay, ChatGPT. I know I'm right. I know I was right about it. You trying to use these semantics and the sensitivity of the word and say it doesn't exist. There's no races, but there are differences. And there is measurable DNA and biological differences, no matter how small they are. Okay? I understand the misuse of the word, but we can start using it correctly once again. Hey, Rudy Guru, signing off.